Alright everyone, so today what I wanted to do is talk about 5 really bad unfixable mistakes in Raid Shadow Legends, give you guys some details about that, and hopefully after this video, your thought process when it comes to the stuff that would normally cause you to make these mistakes, it'll be a lot different. So number 1 on the list is really unfortunate, and to be honest, this is something that a lot of people have been asking Plarium to address for a while now, and that is skill books. And it's really unfortunate that something like this has to be number 1 on a list video like this, but it's really important to make sure that you use your skill books properly. These are an incredibly valuable resource. I mean, a lot of people would even argue that the skill books that you get, the number of them, is even more important than the actual champions themselves, just because of how limited they are and how difficult they are to actually come by. And especially if you're free to play, you really need to be careful with what champions you use your very limited skill books on. And in fact, there are also certain champions where you only actually need to skill book them up to a certain point. Like when I first started out Haikatoon, when I got her, she was a great champion and I wanted to skill book her, but I didn't really realize right away that the most important thing is really just getting this cooldown reduction on her Rally the Horde skill. The other stuff is just not as important. I mean, sure, it does improve her, but the main purpose of this champion was really to give myself that, turn meter fill and that speed buff, as well as having her speed aura. So this was really the primary function of this champion. And as soon as I actually got the cooldown reduction on this, I didn't need to keep going with the skill books. I could have saved some resources and saved those for another champion. And there's a lot of champions like this. Obviously, this is just an example here, but really do some research and find out what is that particular function of a champion. First of all, do they need skill books? Is it going to drastically improve them? And if they do they need to fully be booked out? Or is there a certain point where I can actually stop booking that champion? And then, of course, a lot of it is going to rely on RNG as well. If they need a certain skill that needs to be booked, and of course you still can't land on that skill until the very last skill book, there's nothing you can really do about that. But maybe you'll get lucky and at least give yourself that chance. This is something that Plarium really does need to address, though. The fact that the clan boss is pretty much the most reliable way for free-to-play players to get skill books, and it's just so RNG based, is a huge problem. And just overall, the amount of skill books that you need in the game versus the number of champions that you actually get, it's way off. I mean, skill books are always going to be in short supply, even for pay-to-play players and people who spend money. They are incredibly expensive, and it's just a major thing. So I'm really hoping the Void Tower, at least partly addresses this issue. Hopefully Plarium does something in the future. I personally have suggested like a skill pages type system where even if they don't drop the skill books on their own as a whole drop, which is somewhat understandable considering how valuable they are, what if they were to drop, skill pages in dungeons or something like that, and then you were to combine a bunch of those in order to actually get a whole skill book itself. So I'm trying to get more information from Plarium about this. Believe me when I say it is very difficult to do, but this is easily going to be the number 1 unfixable mistake on this list. And unfortunately, there is no way to take back the skill books that you've used on a champion. Once you've burned through that resource, that's it. You just got to live with it, however that means for you. So anyway, now let's move on to number 2 on the list, and this is probably the one that a lot of people would think would be number 1 on the list, but it's not. It's actually skill books that was number 1 on the list. Number 2 is going to be 6-star champions, and also the other resources that it takes in order to, 6-star and invest in that champion. And this is obviously a really bad, unfixable mistake if you do end up making this and investing the resources to 6-star champions that you don't necessarily need to, which is obviously why this is a topic that a lot of people on YouTube talk about. There's a lot of guides out there, what champion should I 6-star next? I probably have at least a few videos like that, but it is really important considering the amount of grind and resources that it takes in order to get a champion to 6-star. And something you have to keep in mind as well is that, like for a 5-star champion, if you take a champion to 5-star, you could, if it's a really bad champion or you realized it was a really big mistake, you could end up using that champion as food, for the next step, which would be the 6-star step. But unfortunately, because 6-star is the last step in the process, if you do accidentally 6-star champions that you don't necessarily need to, that's it. You can no longer use them as food for another step in the process because you've already gone all the way. So lots of energy. I don't remember the exact number, but you're looking at, between 3,000 to 6,000 plus energy in resources, depending on your experience boosts. Don't forget about the Ascension Potions too. That's a really, really big one, is they do take a lot of Ascension Potions, especially Epics and Legendaries. That's also a decent chunk of resources there. And the resources to farm out the Mastery Scrolls too. Yes, you can reset Masteries. That's not on my list of unfixable mistakes, but the initial investment to either buy out the Masteries for 800 gems or to actually go and farm Minotaur's Lair in order to get the Mastery Scrolls, that is something that, obviously, once you commit those resources, you can't end up getting them back anyway, if that makes sense. So make sure you do your proper research on what champions you need to 6-star. I like to ask myself a really important question when I do this, and that is, what is a champion's purpose? Like, if I want to take somebody to 6-star, what are they going to be doing? And what type of team am I going to be using this champion for? And obviously, the earlier you are in the game, the more versatility you're going to look for in your champions. As you get further into the mid and the late game, versatility becomes less important because you will already have a developed roster. You'll have champions that are specialized for certain roles. They'll be able to do certain things like dungeon, spider, dragon, whatever it is you're using them for, clan boss, arena. But you don't get to that point until you have a developed roster. And earlier on, obviously, you want to be able to tackle more aspects of the game quicker in order to progress quicker. So versatility becomes a much higher priority when it comes to the champions that you 6-star. So that's number 2 on the list, even though a lot of people would probably think that it would be number 1. Skill books still have to take the place, though, which is why it's such a big issue that we've all been trying to talk to Player about for a long time now. But now let's move on to number 3, and that is investing the resources to plus 16 gear. This is pretty important because, just like everything I've talked about so far, this is an unfixable mistake, as in once you've taken the silver to plus 16 something, that's it. You can't get that silver back. When you 6-star a champion, you can't take those resources back. Once you've used skill books, you cannot get those skill books back. That's kind of the theme here, and especially for newer players, that's a lot of silver. It takes a lot of silver to get something to plus 16, so if it's gear that turns out to not really be super great, now you've just wasted a lot of resources that you could have put towards much better use. A really important question that I like to ask myself very specifically when it comes to gear is, if I want to take it up to plus 16, how difficult is it going to be to farm the resources and the silver to take that piece of gear up to plus 16 versus what would it take in the resources to get a new piece of gear that would be an upgrade? You have to kind of weigh those options there. If it's a really good piece of gear and you feel like you can't really farm a better version of it anytime soon, probably going to be a piece of gear that's worth taking to plus 16. If it's something that you could quickly go and do a couple dragon runs or something else and get a better version of it, then you probably don't want to invest the resources to plus 16 that gear. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Another thing is, make sure that you're checking the substats every 4 levels. The actual stats of the gear can drastically change. You can go from a really, really good piece of gear, with fantastic substat possibilities, and then now all of a sudden you get it up to plus 8 and plus 12, and it rolled resistance all the times. 3 times it rolled resistance or something like that. Now it's trash. Now you don't want to take it to plus 16. Other way around too. You can have a piece of gear that's got flat HP, it's got resistance, and it's got flat attack, and then it's got speed, right? But now, if you take it up to plus 12 and it rolled speed all 3 times, well, now it's a different story. It went from a gear that probably wasn't going to be that good to a piece of gear that's actually pretty decent now. So make sure that you're checking, and whenever you do decide to automatically roll your gear, I would never skip, a set of 4 levels. So I would never go, from 0 to 12, for example, or I would never go from 8 to 16. The first 2, I guess, is okay. If you're more mid or late game, you can go 0 to 8 because it's pretty cheap still, but I would never go from, 8 to 16 or from 4 to 16 or something like that. Just be careful and evaluate your substats. Next up, actually on the same line as gear, I kind of somewhat included this as the same mistake, so still kind of mistake number 3 here, is glyphs. And this is actually something that wasn't released when the game first came out, But obviously, there's a lot of really good glyphs that you actually even get in your login rewards. And new players, you're still going to actually see that you're probably getting some decent glyphs. Really big mistake to burn through these incredibly valuable glyphs on a piece of gear that isn't really that great. So again, the important thing about accidentally using really good glyphs on a piece of gear that maybe isn't really super great is ask yourself, how difficult will it be in order to get a glyph like that again, versus how difficult will it be in order for me to replace the piece of gear that I actually used it on. And you can use that question to really decide to yourself, okay, it's not going to be worth using this glyph, or man, I'm never going to replace this piece of gear, so obviously I want to use my best speed glyph on it. So very important, don't burn through your best glyphs on bad items. It can be very difficult, especially for newer mid-game players, in order to get those 4, 5, and 6-star glyphs back again, especially for speed. Next up on the list here, and I actually wanted to put this towards the end because I do have a recent video talking about this in more detail, but it is the Great Hall. Now, unfixable for the Great Hall is a difficult word because technically you cannot actually get your medals back, and there is no way and no plans in the future to be able to reset your Great Hall. However, what you can do is you can plan out, if you have made those really, stupid newbie mistakes that we've all been there with and leveled up stuff that you didn't really need to, what you can do to somewhat fix this, this is why I kind of put this, as a 50-50 here, is you can't actually get your medals back or reset your Great Hall, but what you can do is now take the time to plan out your Great Hall to kind of even out those mistakes that you made. And I have an entire video talking about this in detail, where a very good overall strategy is getting most stuff in your Great Hall to 3 out of 10 and then later 6 out of 10, because those are going to be the jumps between using your bronze medals and silver medals and then your silver medals to gold medals. So this is kind of where the price jumps up a lot. So eventually you're going to want to get everything at your Great Hall to 3 out of 10, and then eventually you're going to want to get everything to 6 out of 10 in your Great Hall. And that's going to help even out some of those mistakes. So you can kind of fix them, but you technically can't actually get the medals back. So that's why I kind of put this towards the end, and you can kind of make of this as you will. But the very last thing that I wanted to actually address here, and this is kind of, number 5, really important, and this is definitely the thing that I want to end off the video on, is summoning your shards. An unfixable mistake is easily summoning shards in a period of time where you don't really need to, and this is especially important if you are free to play. If you're a whale, you can somewhat ignore this. You can always just spend money and buy more shards, but especially if you're free to play or you don't really spend a lot of money on this game, you want to make sure to maximize the value that you get out of your shards. You want to kind of figure out saving your shards for the next ×2 event is going to be the best case scenario for probably 95 to 99% of people who watch this video, because you're going to have double the chances of getting your epics and legendaries, and you just can't beat that. That's almost like getting 2 shards for 1. Now, obviously, if you're a whale, these 10x events that have been popping up, there's a couple little exceptions here and there, but the other noteworthy exception for extremely new players is maybe summoning a few shards just in order to get a couple of decent rare champions to work with if you don't have any other champions. And this is really the point I'm talking about, where you're like incredibly new to the game and you've really just got nothing even close to worthwhile to investing in 6-starring. At that point, I would say, okay, you know what, you can summon a few ancient shards and kind of see what you get. Maybe you'll get lucky, but don't go too crazy, because obviously every ancient shard that you summon outside of one of those double events, you're losing out on a much higher chance of getting epics and legendaries, but it will help you develop your rare roster a little bit if you've got nothing else to work with. So I wanted to leave that off at the end because it is a pretty important point that I haven't really actually gone over in much detail in many of my other videos, and that's going to end up being it for today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. I hope that it was helpful. Thank you very much, everyone, for all of the support on the channel. And if you guys are interested in more Raid Shadow Legends videos, guides, tutorials, all that fun stuff, consider subscribing to the channel. Feel free to leave a quick like as well. It means more than you can imagine. And more Raid Shadow Legends videos should be popping up on the screen right about now. Feel free to check them out. But if not, until next time, take care, everyone. Have a great day. This is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.